Welcome to the second episode of Recruiting on the Rocks. I'm your host, Craig Stone, CEO of HireNetworks. We are a executive search firm, a recruiting firm, staffing agency based here in the Triangle and working nationwide. My guest today on the podcast is Mark Rostick, VP and Senior Managing Director at Intel Capital. Definitely an upgrade over the people I had here last time. Hopefully they will watch this and see it. Intel Capital is a force multiplier for early stage startups inspiring and investing in the future of compute via investments in cloud, silicon, devices, and frontier. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Craig.
Good to have you here.
Having me.
Appreciate it. Let's talk about the important stuff first. Let's talk about the bourbon. So Mark chose the first bourbon, which is Smooth Ambler out of West Virginia, and he chose it because of the pretty label. I wanted everybody to know that.
I was trying to figure out what elephants had to do with bourbon, so we may as well give it a shot and see what it is.
So we'll start with a 90 proof bourbon. Let's taste it as we get rolling here.
All right.
Cheers.
Salute.
Pretty good. Pretty good. I'm easy though. I like them all, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure that my palate has gotten sophisticated enough to distinguish between the super high-end stuff and just high-end stuff, so I think we're in good shape.
Although I think you'll be able to tell between these two as we go up.
The second one, we may be able to tell.
Started at 90 proof, and we'll go up for the second one. All right, Mark, let's talk about Intel a little bit. Talk about you. You've been there for 25 plus years now, which I'm sure is hard to believe. Talk a little bit about your job there.
So my role at Intel Capital is I sit on our investment committee, which also functions as our management committee. And along with three other partners, we manage a roughly $5 billion portfolio of venture investments for the company. So we make investments directly off Intel's balance sheet. We're not a fund or we don't have other LPs involved. And we invest that money in companies that should do two things. One is they should have some nexus with Intel. We learn something, we work together in the market, we complement each other's products, we are able to create new markets that may have not existed before. All those things can be the relevance to Intel that we rely upon when we look at companies. The other thing we're trying to do, obviously, is make money like any other venture investor. And our thesis is, and I can say it in a cheeky way, financially failing companies are rarely strategic to anyone. So the idea is the only way to work with the best founders to find the most successful companies is to be really good investors. And so we seek to make really good bets as good investors and then work really hard to try to add value after the investment so that we can compete with all the household venture names, the Sequoias and the Accels and the A16Zs out there. Those are the firms we're competing against to try to win the opportunity to work with good founders.
So talk a little bit more about corporate venture. It's a little bit of a mystery to some people. It's not, as widespread. It's not that. Can you talk a little? You covered a little bit of how it's different, but how is it different than a traditional venture fund?
Yeah. So it depends, right? There's a full spectrum of different kinds of corporate venture organizations. A lot of corporate venture begins as, hey, we need to learn something about this market, and alongside whatever we're doing from a product or a marketing or a sort of an alliance standpoint, we may want to be involved by starting to invest in early stage companies. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to follow venture firms into those deals. So we don't want to lead deals. We don't want to write particularly large checks or devote a lot of capital to this, but maybe we'll do small, call it $1 to $5 million investments in companies. We may not follow on those investments. It may be a one-time thing, just so that we can become affiliated with the cool kids and that things that might be interesting to the market. And that's a learning exercise. And if we make money on it, great. If not, so what? We learned something, and that was the point in the first place. And over time, some people just always stay on that track. Other groups start to recognize, as I described earlier, that when you're a term taker, when you're in the back seat, it's really hard to build relationships with these founders. And if they're really making a difference, if they're working on technology that becomes a control point in the industry and super valuable, if they create a ton of value, if they become themselves centers of gravity in the market where people want to work with them, you can't really get that benefit being in the back seat in a being a very small investor. So
Right.
it gets more and more difficult to really have an impact. And so our evolution sort of moved from that corporate venture exercise that I described into one where, we are today, which is we write lead checks, we take board seats, we seek to make money on our investments. A, because that's a smart use of Intel shareholder money. But B, that's also, we think, a smart way to work with the best founders that have the most impact on Intel's business, alongside our winnings from the investment itself. So,
Right.
A lot of companies don't want to bridge that gap. So there are probably way more corporations that have venture investment arms that do what I described, much more passive, smaller bets. And there are a few. Some examples are Dell, Google/Alphabet. And there are a couple others who are, what I'll say, in the front seat. Like they want to drive the bus, they just don't want to be a passenger, way in the back.
Right.
Because they think that provides better impact, better intelligence, and frankly, why use the corporation's money? You could devote it to product marketing or R&D or something else. If you're just hoping to learn, there are other ways to build a relationship. This is, if we're going to use the money, we might as well make money on it. We might as well clear our hurdle rate plus. And so that's what we decided to do as a group, and what Intel decided to do as our sponsor.
Okay. I'm going to ask you two questions together, and it's a good segue from what you were just saying.
Sure.
How has Intel Capital, it's been around decades now.
Yeah.
Corporate venture's been around decades. How has it changed? Is that industry, the stuff you just talked about, is that industry change as well, or is that more Intel? How's the world changed for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, so Intel started this process in 1991, so it's been a long time. And I think over the years, we found that, again, it was really hard to be way in the back seat and have any kind of influence over the founders, right? We were taken for granted. We had to wait for other people to lead a deal before we become involved. When we had better insight than our venture, financially oriented venture brethren did, we couldn't take advantage of it. We had to bring them along.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where we felt like, look, we know as much or more about this than anybody. Why are we sitting in the back seat? We can actually be more proactive, find the best founders. They were coming to us anyway. Let's just do that. And so, we went through a couple downturns.
Mm-hmm.
In those downturns, when you make lots of little bets, you can have a really big number of portfolio companies. Very difficult to manage. It becomes unwieldy. And so what we decided was, you can't manage that many bets well. You can't create meaningful relationships with your corporate sponsor with that many companies effectively. So
You can't sit on 15 boards.
no, or even then you weren't even sitting on boards, you were just a board observer, right? So we said, look, let's take the number way down. Let's make fewer bets. Let's make bigger bets. Let's make some money on these bets.
Yeah.
And let's manage them more effectively, both for strategic reasons and financial reasons. And we felt like that was a much more effective way, and our returns certainly bore that out. And I think the strategic engagement does too. So it was almost sort of addition by subtraction, right? We did fewer things, we did them much better. We upgraded our team in certain ways to respond to that sort of change in the way we did things, and it improved. And you align the incentives of the team with the bets that they're making, and let them participate in the winnings in the right way, and good things happen.
Right.
Incentives in capitalism actually work when you let them flourish, and that's what happened to us.
And you feel like the industry's going that way? Same as you
I
guys?
think there's a clear bifurcation, right? I think for those corporations who want to do this long term and have the capital to do it, they tend to move in the direction I described. Let's get in the front seat, as I'll call it. There are still lots of companies that never want to do that, right? They want it to be small. They want it to be very, deliberate and intentional. And so they intentionally kind of say, look, we're never going to be that. We can't afford that team. We're not ready to make that commitment. Because it's a long-term commitment, right?
Yeah,
it's 5 to 10 years at least before you see real returns. And the venture markets are notoriously cyclical. So you have to go on the roller coaster ride. You can't think, okay, every year I need to see 15% IRR on this thing or it's not going to work for us. Venture's not like that, right? It's notoriously volatile.
Right.
So
Right.
a lot of people don't have that appetite, and that's fine, right? They've made a different decision.
Okay. Let's change gears just a little bit. Got to have the token AI question in a podcast, right? How does AI how does that affect the types of investments you guys are making? I ask because I assume it's probably huge. And how long have y'all been? You've probably been investing in AI longer than most.
Yeah, I would say probably well over a decade. And we look at it as a journey. There was data analytics, then there was machine learning and deep learning, then there was generative AI, and we're seeing that cycle sort of play out over that, I would say, let's call it 12 plus year time horizon. And it's funny, a lot of people are like, oh my God, AI just happened when ChatGPT dropped.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about AI forever. It was just more deterministic. It was machine learning and deep learning rather than generative, the way ChatGPT is. I actually run our AI team. We have 7 people, almost a third of our investors are focused exclusively on AI, to give you a sense. One of the guys on our team always says that AI is the future of software, right? AI is software going forward. And so we have been making bets. We have silicon bets that are accelerators. We have service provider bets, so new clouds that are focused on AI. We have infrastructure bets, orchestration, instrumentation, development tools, so that people who want to develop model-based applications can do that on some kind of platform. And then we have application bets, like a company called Lilt, that does content generation and translation using generative models. A company called Bria, which is in the video space, for example. So we have a pretty full-fledged, strategy document that maps out everything. And you see these giant maps from some of the venture firms that have 1,000 companies. That's what we're navigating. And, I would say we probably did 7 or 8 new investments in AI just last year. It's critical. People talk about it, my friend and the CEO of Lilt, I asked him, he's got a PhD in CS from Stanford, so he's
Smart.
a little bit smarter than I am. And I said, when ChatGPT dropped, we asked him, how would you characterize this moment? And he said, I feel like it's like nuclear power. It's that fundamental shift in software. Relative to some of the other things that were going on at the time, like the metaverse stuff was happening back then, and people were talking about blockchain, and he was like, that stuff is a sideshow at best compared to this. And you've seen that over the past 3 or 4 years now. Like somebody said, I saw a quote, it was from another VC, and said something like, more money has been invested in AI than, some giant infrastructure projects, right?
Yeah.
So people, like the data centers, the chip fabs, everything that's going into this effort, it is foundational. And it's gonna be akin to the internet, I think, in terms of what it will do for society, frankly, good and bad.
Yeah, I feel like you guys are uniquely positioned because it's Intel to, people think of AI and think of just software.
Right.
But I was listening to All In podcast yesterday, and they were talking about just the shortage of compute power that's coming. So GPUs, all these things that you're involved in the whole stack probably, whereas most funds aren't.
Yeah, I think you have to understand what's happening. And I'm not an expert in everything, obviously, but to give you a sense, on our team, we have someone who used to be a chip designer. We have 2 guys who used to write AI models, for different organizations. One internally, one who was at Goldman Sachs and PwC doing that work. We have another guy who's literally a quantum physicist that we use to help us. So
what about you, though? You're an attorney.
Right, I'm just some guy.
Right?
That I managed to turn out to be the manager, I suppose. That's my big impact on the organization. But it's not a game that you just sort of say, hey, I'm going to go get me some of that AI, which we joke about. Like right now, at the early stages of a technology, you have to be super well informed. Mm-hmm. You can't just be a software investor and get it, in my opinion, because there's just too much going on to understand where the differentiation is. So we've gone out, recruited some experts to the team, and I think, based on what we've seen in our portfolio, we're feeling pretty good about that. And, we're an early investor in Figure, the robotics company, for example, which obviously has sort of skyrocketed in terms of its attention and the amount of venture capital it's been able to attract. So, we feel pretty good about it, but it's like not close to done. It's sort of I feel like it's the first chapter.
Right. Okay. So we mentioned boards before. You've sat on a few
Just
over the years.
Yeah.
How have they matured? And we're switching gears a little bit again, but have they matured? Have they gotten better? I mean, I don't even mean from a liability. That was an issue for years. How have they changed?
This ebbs and flows, I think. I'd love to say, the industry's way better at this than they used to be, but they're not always. I feel like I've matured. Maybe I'm just crankier with most of these board, I'm the guy saying, wait a minute, we can't do that. But one event that created some more sophistication for venture boards, say, as opposed to like a public board, was the failure of SVB. Everybody's cruising along. Everybody thinks the world is fine. Yes, we've had our ups and downs from macro shocks like the Great Recession or the internet bubble popping or whatever else you want to point to. But SVB sort of was something that impacted everybody personally. I had 4 or 5 companies who banked with SVB that couldn't get money for payroll. Right. Did we have any real treasury function? Had we thought through those things before? Not well enough. Some companies did, but as a policy across our portfolio, I think we needed to improve there. And I think the venture industry as a whole was sorely lacking in sophistication, even on treasury. It's like, oh yeah, throw it all in SVB and don't worry about it, right? Because it was fine until it wasn't.
Right.
So I think that was one thing that made companies more demanding of their boards. But even today, I think it's still driven a little too much by the individual investor. I mean, if I'm an experienced board member, I may demand things from the board. Right. But if you don't have that, I think the venture industry's bias or default is to trust the founder. And that's why you get like this Elizabeth Holmes stuff. You get other, shenanigans being sort of committed by the managers sometimes. The founders do some nutty stuff. You're like, how did the board not know this? Well, maybe the board wasn't paying enough attention. So
But the board should be the checks and balances.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you have these really charismatic founders who have larger than life personalities that kind of dominate a board discussion. And if you don't have a counterweight on the board, it's like, hold on a minute, not buying it. Let's go back through that. You're not going to have that check. So, I think as you get more sophisticated, you do it personally, but I think the venture industry has a lot to learn about how to manage boards more effectively.
Okay. So, do you influence the hiring executives in the board companies?
Sure, all the time.
And board members too, probably.
Yeah, I mean, both. Like any other good investor would. We're on the board. I mean, I refer companies to, recruitment firms all the time. I participate in the recruitment of people, interviewing them, assessing them. I mean, it's just, to me, it's a critical part of being a board member and an investor, right? Especially, if you have a super sophisticated CEO who's done it 3 times, that person needs less help, right? And they say, look, I think I want to hire this person. Will you just talk to him or her just to give me a second opinion before I decide? But and I'm working with a CEO now, never been a CEO before, young, somewhat inexperienced, kind of has a tiger by the tail in the sense that his business is growing really rapidly, desperately needs the help, but doesn't have a good framework for assessing what we would consider to be an experienced professional executive.
Right.
And so that's partially my role. I mean, you count on, guys like you to provide that counsel as well, right? Hey, you're not setting your sights high enough. This person isn't qualified for the role you're trying to hire for. But that's my role too, is like, hey, how do I help coach this person through this? How do I interview people and say, this person, okay, this person, check on all this stuff because I think there's a hole there. So I think my role, any investor's role, certainly any of our investors who sit on boards, is to be a material part of that process.
And you're probably assessing the people that are already in the company as well, probably in due
Oh, yeah.
diligence as well, but then afterwards, hey, they're not, the VP of sales is struggling, or
That's right.
it's time to bring in a CRO over the VP of sales or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot. The CEOs I work with, I talk a lot about leverage. And what I mean by that is, are you getting leverage from your C-level team, right? Do you not worry about that function anymore because you have the right person in the seat? Because you got other stuff to do,
Right.
Mr. and Mrs. CEO. And a lot of CEOs will be like, oh, I got to go over and fix sales. I'm like, if you have to fix sales, we have the wrong person leading sales.
It's not scalable either, right?
Right. And in fact, I was having a discussion with the CEO yesterday. He's like, yeah, let's talk about go-to-market. I do feel like I need to go in and fix it. I'm like, what do you know about go-to-market? You've never done go-to-market. You don't know anything about it, right? So what are you going to fix? And how do you know what to fix, right? That's why we need to hire somebody
Yeah.
that's of a, someone who has a skill set that is commensurate with the demands we're going to put on that position. So that's, sometimes CEOs are like, I need to go fix that thing. I'm like, yeah, you can have an
Good luck.
opinion, but you don't know what to do any more than I do, right? I've never been a CRO of a company. I would never presume say, hey, let me go in and fix that for you, right? I'm just going to mess stuff up.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So when you're looking at those people, what, it's the age-old question. What are you looking for in these people? What are the key pieces? I mean, obviously their experience and
Sure.
How do you mentioned leverage, for example, but what are the?
There's always I won't call it the easy stuff, but it's the easy to identify stuff. Have they had the requisite experience? Like, do they, a friend of mine who's a doctor, one of my kids was having surgery, and a friend of mine was a doctor. We're like, hey, look, do we go to like a Duke or Stanford or somewhere to have this done, or is there a local physician? And she told us, she said, look, it doesn't matter where they are. Ask them how many times they've done it. Like if somebody's done a surgery 1,000 times, they've seen everything and they'll know how to react. If somebody's super well educated but only done it 10 times and they're at a big institution, that person's going to make mistakes and not know. Everybody does.
Yeah.
So part of it is just how many reps have they had, and have they made enough mistakes on somebody else's time? They're not going to make them on ours, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
The other part is more like the intangibles, and the things. Somebody said it well the other day. I was talking to a founder, and he said, we were talking, how do you recruit people? And he said, I really like people who have done something at a really high level. And that's not necessarily the job I'm recruiting for. Like maybe they're a accomplished musician, or maybe they were a college athlete or something else. And like something where they've had to make sacrifices and had to be, competitive and have some intensity to them.
Discipline.
And endurance and all those sorts of things. So they have this sort of, I'll make it work. And I know it's not always going to be pleasant or easy attitude. So some of those intangibles you look for too. I like people who have talked their way into stuff, maybe because I've talked my way into stuff in the past. Like a non-intuitive jump from one thing to another. How'd you get there? What did you do? I like people who sort of say, well, I just made that happen because that's what I wanted.
They almost will it to happen.
Yeah, it's like, hey, look, I talked my way in the back door and I cleaned the kitchen until I could get to the front of the house, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. I like that, personally like that attitude too, because it shows some grit and determination and not entitlement, right? And so I think the mix of those two things is usually what I'm assessing when I'm talking to candidates.
So what do you see the most so you talked about the young CEO, hasn't done it before.
Right.
But I see this across even experienced CEOs. What are the mistakes you see them making in hiring? Sometimes they want to believe what they want to believe, right? But what are the mistakes you see that they're making in the hiring?
Sometimes the pain is so acute, they just want somebody to do some of the work, right? And so expediency trumps sort of competency, I'll say. So if I can get a B or a C player in the role just to take some of the load off of me, I'm happy for a little while, right? It's sort of like I'm not actually curing my disease, but if you can give me some pain relief, I'll feel better for 24 hours or something. And I see that mistake a lot. It's like, I want to go fat. Yeah, this person's fine. And they haven't really taken a step back. This is where the leverage thing comes in. That person's not going to give you any leverage. You're going to still be doing the same job. You're going to look over their shoulder all the time because they're not qualified. And so you'll get temporary relief at best. And at worst, they're going to break a bunch of stuff that's not already broken.
Right.
So I would say that's mistake number one. I think mistake number two is, people tend to gravitate to people like themselves. We all do it. And so, oh, I know this guy from this, or I know this woman from that. And the familiarity makes it easy for me to trust that person. So I'm going to hire that person, rather than saying, well, even though I know this person or trust him or her in a certain context, I need to judge that against what's really out there, because it may not be right. So I also see that, but mostly it's, I'm dead tired. I just need somebody to
Survival.
pick up the pack for a little while. And that feels good for a hot minute and then feels worse,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right.